I knew I could fly. I knew I was as good as any of the guys that they were taking into their pilot training intakes. And I wasn't going to back off because I believed it just wasn't fair.
Hi, I'm Jess Rowe, and this is the Jess Rowe Big Talk Show, a podcast that goes big and deep to show you a different side to our guests in conversations about the things that truly matter. Deborah Lawrie is a trailblazer. She paved the way for women to become Australia's first female airline pilot. But it wasn't easy. She took Ansett Airlines all the way to the High Court to make that happen. And this court decision didn't just open cockpit doors, it had implications for equal opportunity for women right across the board. Deborah had been told that women couldn't fly commercial airliners, that women couldn't work and have a family at the same time, along with other absurd prejudices that having a period would impact on your ability to fly a plane during that time of the month. Her remarkable story is detailed in her beautiful memoir, Touching the Sky. It's a great read. And this grandmother's story is far from over. She's now the longest flying female airline pilot in the world. And I wanted to talk with her about what motivates this incredible woman. Deborah, you broke down so many barriers for women. Did you realise at the time how significant it was what you were doing?
No, not at the time. I was a very naive 25-year-old. I knew that I was in a big battle, but I had no idea what the significance of that would be, not until a long time later.
You were a naive 25-year-old, but I marvel at that naive 25-year-old because you took on some of the most fearsome opponents, including Reginald Ansett.
Yeah.
And he was the head of the airline at the time. What were the sorts of things he was saying to you or that you were hearing?
Well, first of all, Reg Ansett started the airline, Ansett Airlines. He had a policy of no women were ever going to fly in any of his aircraft. He just believed women weren't safe. He believed that women would panic, would go crazy once a month, maybe even more often, that they weren't strong enough, that they would run away and have lots of babies and not stay in a career for any length of time, although he wasn't so much worried about that aspect of it. He just didn't want women in his aircraft, flying his aircraft.
You telling me that, it makes me sick to my stomach to think here is this person who's a boss, in inverted commas, and making his opinions so clear, but also leading to terrible discriminatory practices. But starting with once a month, that because we have periods, that means we can't handle an aircraft.
Yeah, well, the times were different. The Equal Opportunity Law was new to Victoria. It came in 1978. Ansett initially applied to be exempted from that law. They just believed that the law shouldn't apply to them in the business that they were in of flying aircraft because they honestly believed, or Reg Ansett believed, women were unsafe. There were no tram drivers, there were no women bus drivers, I don't believe, probably at that time. There was a lot of, jokes always going on about women drivers. I think that sort of was a carryover to aircraft.
Your determination, though, to take on this particular person and this organisation, where on earth did that come from?
I was always stubborn as a child and always trying to prove to my father that I could run the fastest, I could be best at school. You put a challenge in front of me, I would take it. But when it came to this particular battle, I was warned that it might be very nasty, it might be really hard, but I, again being naive, thought that was only going to be would last about a week. So a week out of my life, what was that? That was nothing, right? So that was doable. I had no idea that this was going to be for such a long period of time, and it's probably good that I didn't, because I used to wake up each day and just face the new challenge, whatever that was for that, at the time, and wherever the case was progressing at the time. But I wasn't going to give up, because the longer I hung in there, the more I had to lose. So for me, it was important. I knew I could fly. I knew I was as good as any of the guys that they were taking into their pilot training intakes. And I wasn't going to back off, because I believed it just wasn't fair. So I wasn't really thinking about, women's rights or anything like that. It was more of a personal thing that I felt that I was being discriminated against unfairly, because I knew I was capable.
And you weren't just capable, you topped the interview process. You had a psychological assessment that you did exceptionally well. So there was absolutely no reason that you should not have been given that job.
That's correct. It unfolded many, many years later that when I went through that selection process, the group that were conducting that actually selected me to be included in the intake. And when that message got through to Reg Ansett, he knocked it on the head and said there would be no way that was ever going to happen. And from that point on, it really became a personal battle between him and me.
And that personal battle, it takes a toll. And to be able to keep getting up day after day, tell me how you managed to do that, because even now there are women facing situations where they think, this is too hard, I can't keep going. What was it that you could draw on that kept you going, Deborah?
Probably just an inbuilt resilience. I come from a family, my grandfather was a fighter in federal politics in the Labor Party, and he stood up for the rights of workers back in the 40s and 50s. And I think I got that, inherited something from him that I know there were days where I woke up and I thought, well, yeah, this is all too hard. And the other thing that was weighing on my mind was that it was costing, the spiralling cost. But it was not on the agenda to give up, because it was something that I really, really wanted. I wanted to do it, and I knew I could do it.
And not only that you knew you could do it, as a young woman, you knew that you were meant to fly. And you write about that in your beautiful book, Touching the Sky. Tell me about that moment when you knew, I'm meant to be up in the clouds.
Well, it wasn't when I was much younger than in school. I actually wanted to be an astronaut, and I always thought that was pretty a special thing to do. But that really wasn't possible in those days. But my father, when I was 14, my father took flying lessons. He had a lifelong ambition to learn to fly, and he wasn't able to when he was younger. And by the time he was in his early 40s, he had enough money and time to do that. And I was the eldest. I was very close to him. And I got interested in going, looking at all the theory books with him. I learnt a lot, helped him with the checklists, did a lot of things with him, and also included going to the airport and waiting for him while he had his flying lessons. And then I was rewarded with being able to sit in the back seat of this aircraft that he was learning to fly. And one day the instructor turned around to me and said, how about you learn to fly? And that tweaked something in me, and I thought, yeah, why not? And my father gave me 2 lessons for my 16th birthday, and I actually didn't like it when I first started. I felt very awkward, an awkward 16-year-old. However, I had this thing in my head where I needed to prove to my father that I could fly solo. And I thought, once I do that, I'll move on to something else. My mother at the time was driving me to these flying lessons, and she thought it was just a crazy phase that I would get over eventually. I had to do a lot of jobs. I had to pay for the lessons myself, so I had to do things like mowing lawns and washing cars and all those sorts of things to save up enough money for these lessons. And I thought, well, once I'm solo, that'll be it. However, the day that I did fly my first solo flight was just so amazing, and so an incredible feeling came over me that I suddenly realised, actually, I am meant to do this. I need to go forward with this business of flying.
That feeling, explain that to me, what that is like.
It's a bit like you just go, I want to do more of this. I want to become better at this. I want to make this my life. And the freedom and the joy of flying was just so fantastic that I just wanted to be everywhere around aeroplanes. If I wasn't in them, I wanted to be near them. I spent all my weekends at the airport. I was just completely immersed in aviation.
Was it the beginning of a love affair?
Oh, definitely. I still have it. So, yeah, definitely.
What I think when you tell me about that flying solo, at the time your mum was on the ground sitting in her car reading a book, and I've got teenage daughters and I'm teaching them to drive at the moment.
Oh, God.
And that,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
But that is so stressful. So I can't begin to get my head around how it must have been for your mum to be sitting on the ground looking up at the sky at her teenage daughter in a plane.
Well, Mum knew that I was being looked after by a very, very competent flying instructor. So I don't believe she worried about me being up in the air with him. It was a bit of I think, a break for her. She had 4 children, and one brother was profoundly autistic. So Mum had her challenges looking after all of us, and this was her moment to have a little bit of time to herself. And she would read her book and be blissfully unaware of what I was doing, because she knew that I was in the hands of a very competent instructor. But the day that I flew solo, I came back to the car, and Mum was a little bit surprised to see me back so early, because normally the lessons last an hour, and this one was a little bit shorter. And we were driving home, and I was in this kind of daze about what had just happened, and she was trying to talk to me, and obviously I wasn't engaging, and then all of a sudden she said, what is wrong with you? And I couldn't, I didn't want to answer Mum's questions. I just wanted to think about this flying that I'd just done. And I said to her, well, Mum, I just flew the aeroplane by myself. And Mum went white, absolutely white. She never figured that was on the agenda.
And then flying it on your own solo suddenly opened up this world for you, thinking or knowing this is what I have to do with my life.
Yeah. I knew that I wanted to have flying in my life. What that road that would take, I wasn't sure at that stage, but I knew that I wanted to keep flying. And I think Mum helped me a little bit after that, because I became aware of an association called the Australian Women Pilots Association. And it's a much more sophisticated group than it was back then. But I was introduced to that organisation, and Mum used to drive me to the meetings because I still couldn't drive at that age.
So there you are, able to fly a plane but not drive a car.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning the clutch on the car was a lot more difficult, I have to say, than the aeroplane.
So in terms of flying a plane, you got your hours up and you applied to ANZET, and suddenly there was these various roadblocks put in your way. And you mentioned there about the clutch on a car, but one of the roadblocks put in your way about ANZET was the hydraulic. You needed to be stronger as a woman to fly a plane.
Yes. First of all, there was I did a lot of flying between that solo flight and being able to apply for ANZET. I did air racing. I did lots of safaris around Australia, convincing all my friends they needed to come with me on holidays. So gradually I got more and more hours up. I got a commercial licence. I did my instructor's rating. I became a flight instructor. And then you reach a point where you are eligible you meet the minimum criteria to apply for an airline. And when I did that, that's when they decided, well, actually we don't want women because they're not strong enough and lots of other reasons. What they were referring to there was when the older style jets lose all their hydraulic systems, the controls do become quite heavy, but it's still not beyond the capability of women. So, and it was interesting in court because they were asked, do they conduct tests for the applicants to pass the strength test, to which they said no, because they just didn't. So what they were just making the wild assumption that women wouldn't be able to cope.
And there you were, very quietly showing that, yes, you could cope, and also paving the way for so many other women. During this particular battle, how much sense of support did you get from the wider public?
As the case became more and more public in the news and on television and all that sort of thing, there were groups of women that rallied to support. They even had held demonstrations outside the ANZET head office. A fighting fund was started for me by Carolyn Kingham, and there was a lot of people who also that wrote letters of support. There were also some that were very negative, that appeared, sometimes their letters appeared in newspapers. So it was a case that really divided people. And yeah, well, that's just how it was. Yeah, it was very divisive.
And the times were different, as you've said, and it divided people, but it makes me think now about a lot of the battles that women are still having to face, about battles in public with people taking sides. How were you able to navigate through that and remain true to yourself? Because often when things are so difficult, and I'm thinking about times in my life when I've had to stand up to bullies, but it's been hard, and often I've thought, you know what, maybe this is the time to walk away. Why did you not walk away?
Well, because they would win first up, and what's the point of that? So, but I hear what you're saying about it's hard to put on that brave face every day, and it was extremely frustrating sometimes. But there was one reporter, Pamela Graham, who was very, very generous with her gestures towards me, and she started reporting about this case, she actually took a side, and it was the first time this had happened in reporting. But Pam allowed me to vent my emotions before I went on camera. So whenever something was really, really annoying or a setback or what have you, I would do the stomping, swearing, venting, getting it all out. And then she would say to me, "Are you right to go?" And I'm sure I'm right to go. And I put on this persona of calmness and determination because I just wasn't going to let it win. I wasn't going to let him, Ansett, beat me. It was just I had to be true to myself the whole way through.
And you weren't going to let them beat you. Where also did your strength come from when you won the case, but you then were walking into a workplace that was incredibly blokey still?
Yeah.
And not just blokey, there were a lot of men there who didn't want you there.
Yeah. Yeah, look, blokey workplace, yes, it was. There were people, though, that were very, very supportive, and I will be forever grateful to those guys. But what it meant was that I had to not make a mistake. So I had to study extra hard. I had to perform extra well because I knew that I was under that microscope and they were just waiting for one slip up. And so it was very stressful, but I was determined not to fail, even though sometimes they tried to make me fail, but it in the end it just it didn't work their way.
How did they try to make you fail?
Oh, they would some of them were trying to make me break down on the flight deck, just being difficult to deal with, unhelpful, deliberately sort of throwing a challenge my way just to see if I would take the bait. It was just subtle things like that. I mean, there was some really, really bad behaviour, which I have to say these days is not tolerated on flight decks. But back in those days, things were different, and captains could be bullies at times, not just with me, but with other people as well. But particularly in my case, there were times when they were just outright bullies.
Can you give me a particular example?
Probably the best one would be a time we landed in Canberra, and that was due to poor weather, and a lot of aircraft diverted into Canberra, and we weren't going to be able to get anywhere else. So the whole crew, all the crews from these aircraft had to overnight that night in the hotel, and that meant getting taxis from the airport to the hotel. And there was like 4 to a taxi, I think we calculated. And this one senior captain who was the senior crew member in the room counted everybody and divided by 4 and came up with 3 taxis or whatever it was. And clearly we actually needed 1 extra taxi because there was 1 extra person, but he kept deliberately counting and leaving me out. And it was very humiliating, as you can imagine, to be standing there in uniform with your colleagues and this guy counting the numbers and then just skipping over me each time he came to me, dividing by 4, and that was 3 taxis. This one flight engineer stood up to him and said, "Excuse me, Captain, but I will go in a taxi with her." And he was amazing. And it made, what that essentially did was made this captain look stupid in front of everybody, because nobody was feeling comfortable with what he was doing or saying, but this one person stood up for me, which was fantastic. So that was a double-sided thing. Yeah.
And having people stand up in a way, there was one of your dearest friends, Marg, who was a flight attendant, and early on she stood up too, didn't she?
Yes. A lot of the girls would say they wouldn't tolerate any comments from passengers. They would dress them down immediately. But Marg was a very, very, very supportive, as were a lot of them in the early days. It was terrific.
And what would you say to passengers? There was a particular passenger that was in seat 5A.
Oh, 5A, yes. Lovely guy. So this was a little bit later in my career when I was overflying with KLM Cityhopper, and we did a triangle route from Amsterdam to Bristol to Cardiff and then back to Amsterdam. So passengers that were for Cardiff stayed on in Bristol when we did that first landing. And I was just sitting up the front. This was a Fokker 50, so it's a turboprop aircraft. And I was sitting up the front, and one of the cabin crew came up to me and she said, there's a guy in 5A who's complaining about a woman being up the front of this aircraft. And she said, if you don't do something about it, well, I'm certainly going to do something about it. And I thought, you know what, I'm just in the mood for this today. So I got out of my seat and I walked back and I slid into row 4 and leant on the back of the seat. And I looked at 5A and immediately I noticed he's quite short. So anyway, I said, excuse me, have you got a problem? Is there something I can help you with? And this is how the conversation started. And I was also aware at the time that he had some friends around that were starting to chuckle. And it went something along the lines of, I heard you complaining about women up the front. And then one of his mates says, yeah, about time he came into the 90s or something like that. Anyway, this conversation went backwards and forwards. And then 5A said to me, you're Australian, aren't you? And I thought, because being Australian in KLM was quite unique. And I said, yes. And then he said, well, I think I've flown with you before. And I thought, wow. So I said to him, did you get there last time? And he was he obviously had lost the battle long before this particular line, but his friends just burst out laughing. And, I said, well, maybe you might get there this time as well. Let's just see. And with that, I sort of went back to the flight deck and then I was thinking to myself, have I actually overstepped the mark here? Because I was quite forthright and with him and because I just don't tolerate bad behaviour from passengers. So I just needed to pull him into line. And then I thought, oops, maybe I'm going to get into trouble, if he reports me or something. But that never happened. Never happened. And I've dressed down people before and they actually come up and apologise.
Well, it's because you call them out on it
Yeah.
and they realise.
Yeah.
Where can they go?
They can't. Yeah, he couldn't go anywhere. He absolutely couldn't go anywhere. Mm.
You spoke earlier about that people were waiting for you to fail.
Yeah.
That there was this pressure that you had to be perfect. And often I think as women we do that. We feel like we have to be the top of the class or do everything, so there's no area for criticism. How do you keep your nerve then? Because I think about times when there is a lot of pressure and people can just lose their nerve and think, no, I can't do this, and you don't perform at your best, but you are able to.
Yeah, I think there's one particular occasion where this was highlighted to me, and I was with 4 other colleagues and all of us were on a Boeing 727 doing circuits at Avalon in Melbourne, and it was a training flight, so we were practicing an engine fire drill. And I always, in those situations, chose to go last because then I knew what I was up against or whatever. But so we would stand behind the cockpit area, and one by one we'd rotate through the right-hand seat and do this drill. And all these guys were like bellowing out their memory items and, chest banging and doing this amazing performance, which was not what I was into at all. I had a completely different approach or a different technique. And I remember doing that failure drill, and then I remember feeling, should I be behaving differently? And I turned to the check captain and I said, I do it differently, don't I? And he said to me, yes, you do, but it doesn't matter. And that was the tick to say, you're achieving the result a different way, in your own way, and that's okay. So I really hung on to that for the rest of my career.
And your career, you kept pushing through barriers the whole time. It wasn't it was almost you won the court case, but then it began and there was still more to keep doing. And I think about the time when you had a baby and you took time out from work, and you'd been told early on you can't mix flying with motherhood. Did you ever think that would be the case, that you couldn't mix the two?
Well, I had my son in 1991, which up until then I was trying to figure out how I would manage upgrading to captain, having a family and all that sort of stuff. And I was trying to find the right moment when to start a family in the career path. But the pilot's dispute came along, which disrupted everybody, and I was actually grounded for a couple of years with this battle that was going on. And it was during that time that I had my son. Looking back, not looking back, I would say these days women who fly, it's much easier for them to have children and raise a family because provision is made for them to a certain extent. But it is not easy. It's certainly not easy, but it can be done. And there's no reason why you can't have one and not the other. But it's just a matter of working that out. I would like to have had more children, but that wasn't the case for me. But I'm very grateful for the one I did have, who's followed in my footsteps. So
he's a pilot as well.
Yes, yeah, he's amazing.
And he learned from you. He grew up thinking that all mums flew planes, didn't he?
Well, he grew up thinking that, or realising that it was quite okay for his, for mums to fly planes. And it is about what children are exposed to, because one of my I'm a member of an International Women Airline Pilots Association, and one of the we have a conference every year, and one year at one of these conferences, a friend of mine was there with her daughter, and her daughter had only ever seen her mother and her mother's friends in uniform, and when she saw a male pilot in uniform, she actually said to her mother, "Mummy, can boys be pilots too?" And so it just goes to show you what, through the eyes of a child, what they're seeing and what reality is, So she just thought airlines belong to women.
You've shown us that, though. Do you realise the significance, Deborah, of what you've done?
Well, Well, yes and no. I mean, I know that it was a significant battle to win, and I know that, but not just that. It's the fact that I stuck with the career, because if I had have won and not gone anywhere or given up my career halfway through or something like that, maybe that wouldn't have had the same resonance that it does now. But I think that to have won it and then gone through such a long career with so many twists and turns and challenges along the way, I think that's probably something that I can be proud of. And also the fact that that case broke the barriers for women in other fields as well.
When you say that, though, you almost say it, I wouldn't say in a shy way, but you strike me as someone you don't like that accolade or attention.
Oh, yeah, I get I suppose that I understand that a lot of people have fought lots of battles in their own way, and so I'm always a little bit, I guess, humble in that sense, because I do recognise that many people have done many great things, and you know, if I've been able to help others achieve something or chase a dream or what have you, then I'm happy for that.
I thank you for what you've done, because paving the way not only for me but for my daughters,
Yes.
my granddaughters, once they, if and when they arrive, but all of that. What I wanted to ask you now was about some scary times, those twists and turns in your career. And you share in your book a particular incident when you were flying from Amsterdam to a town in Norway. Can you tell me about what that was like?
Yeah, so that was again on the Fokker 50 turboprop, and we were flying from Amsterdam to Stavanger. And I was with a very, very new first officer, so he'd only been out on the line for 3 weeks. And we got into a situation where we had the de-icing system for our engines had a fault which wasn't presented to us on the flight deck. There's certain parts of that system that tell you if something's wrong with it, but this was to do with an external signal coming into the system from the outside air temperature. And as a result of that, we were in heavy icing conditions, and both engines started to basically ice up and became like big ice crushers. So they're chewing this ice blocks off, and that's banging on the side of the aircraft, and the whole aircraft's vibrating, and we're losing performance without this being without our engine instruments indicating as to why we're losing performance, but we were losing altitude and speed. And I was trying to troubleshoot what the hell was wrong with this aeroplane. And I could see my first officer beside me was just, eyes like saucers. So I thought, I have to give him jobs to do, because he's like absolutely terrified. And in those situations, I was thinking, this can't be happening. My whole career started flashing in front of my face. I started thinking stupid things like the Estonia ferry had sunk just a week earlier, I think it was, and there were 900 people drowned in the North Sea. And I thought, well, what 55 of us, that's not going to matter, after all of this. These crazy thoughts going through my mind. But in the end, I thought, wait a second, my son's in the creche and I need to get back to pick him up. So this just isn't happening. But what eventually happened was we descended to a level where that ice melted and those engines regained their regained power, and we were able to continue. It was very scary.
Just hearing you say that. And you're in charge. You say you thought about your son. How then were you able to go from that thought to then calmly thinking, this is what I need to do?
In that situation, I was trying to figure out where was the closest airport, but we were right smack bang in the middle of the North Sea, so we had to keep going to Stavanger. Even though your mind is thinking about those things, you also focus on the problem at hand. And part of my job as being in command of that aircraft was to look after my crew and look after passengers. So that's in your forefront, and that's what you do focus on. The thing I was most concerned about, which is quite ironic really, was that if something did happen to us, no one would know why. And that's why I got my colleague to write down all the instrument indications. I said, write everything down, because if they find us or this whatever, and if they will know what we were seeing. And I wanted them to know that. That was like forefront in my mind at the time. But yeah. Anyway, it was. I also made promises to myself. I said, if you get out of this, you're going to give this up because this is ridiculous. And of course, I never did. But yeah, you make sort of things like that. Later on, the Dutch have beautiful expressions sometimes. And later on, the chief pilot said to me, when they discovered the root cause of the engine anti-ice system failure, he said, I'm thinking you flew through the eye of a needle. And that was such a powerful expression, because those two engines kept going. And that was the amazing part. Even though they were suffocating, they kept going.
Those lessons that you learn, but that promise that you sort of had made to yourself about not flying again. Yeah. Thankfully, you kept going, and in doing so, I think you show all of us that it's never too late to keep learning.
Correct.
You learnt to fly different sorts of aircraft, and most recently, I really enjoyed reading this particular quote that was on the back of when you're in a room doing some training. It was a C.S. Lewis quote from one of the ground school instructors that said, "You're never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream."
Yes, that was when, after COVID, when I had been flying with Tiger Air prior to COVID, and that airline got shut down, but it was part of the Virgin Group. And so the pilots in Tiger Air were on the Virgin seniority list, and we were there to be there in case of recall, that if Virgin started or rebuilt itself after COVID. I didn't think in a million years that I would ever fly again, and I sort of came to the conclusion, move on. And actually when I really started in earnest writing this book. But in 2022, I got a phone call, and it was one of the ladies from Virgin asking me, would I like to come back? They really need their pilots back. And I thought, well, I'm quite old, so am I going to be able to do this? Or I'm a lot older, I should say. But I had a little bit of a challenge to myself. I was 300 hours short of hitting a milestone of 20,000 hours. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a crack. So I went back into ground school after all those years. It felt like I'd done a full circle back into the ground school. And the staff so kindly put that on the back of my nameplate that we all had in front of us on the desks. And I think it was their acknowledgement that we want you back. So that was really lovely.
Where does that courage come from to go back?
The old thing, it's a challenge, another challenge. So I wanted to leave on my own terms. I didn't really want to have a career end with COVID. So, yeah, it was more or less that as well.
When you are now in the cockpit, is it different? Do you feel different to that young woman who first hopped into the cockpit for Ansett?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got so much experience behind me now, and in a lot of ways, but I feel very calm. I've always been calm, but I just feel that I'm in a very comfortable place. It's very familiar. It's where I'm happy, and I enjoy the dynamic of it, working with a crew and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it is different. I mean, I don't feel the same pressures that I felt when I was a lot younger. I mean, you still have to perform and pass checks and things like that, but it's a lot more of a friendly environment these days.
And thanks to people like you, it is a much friendlier environment. What would you say to young women who are setting out on their journey and feel that there are still obstacles being put in their way?
If there are obstacles, it's probably because of one or two individuals who are, outside the normal, the normal thing. So they're behaving in a way that's not acceptable. Just find a different pathway, or engage with people who are going to help you and support you and nurture those relationships. And don't let one or two individuals get you down, because in the end they won't succeed.
You now have a flyover,
yes,
named after you.
Amazing.
Just near Sydney Airport.
Yes.
And as I say that to you, you have this wonderful big smile on your face, Deborah.
Yes.
Why is there that smile?
It's just such a great honour. It's so hard to explain the feeling of being honoured in that way. It's quite it is a lovely structure, and it swoops around and, descends into the terminal. Best part about it is that it actually passes over the top of Sir Reginald Ansett Drive, which is a little side street in Sydney Airport. But amazing. So it was only the other night there was something on the news and they were filming just past the flyover, and I got all excited. I thought, oh, God, I'm going to see it on TV. It's an amazing honour, and to think that it'll be there for such a long time after I'm not here, it's terrific. It's really great.
And that delicious irony too.
Yeah, I know. Wonderful, isn't it?
Of it swamping.
Right over the top.
Deborah, thank you for making a difference in all of our lives. You are such an inspiration, and I thank you for showing us how to be brave and to follow our dreams.
Thanks, Jessica. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Deborah has done so much to change our lives, and I thank her for the difference she's made, not only to my life, but to my daughters and one day my granddaughters. What a woman. Now you can read more about Deborah's remarkable story in her book, Touching the Sky. It is a really beautiful read. And do you know what? I am now on YouTube, so what would be fantastic? Subscribe. Watch me on the screen, because I love to connect with you in all the ways that I possibly can. So not only am I in your ears, I'm also on your screens. So all you need to do is hit subscribe.